And once we do that, then we get a new data set which will look something like this. And we now have these dates, close dates, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff. So what we want to do, of course, is if you're looking at complaints and we're looking at created time and closed time, created date and closed date, or the time it was created and the time it got closed, then we would like to know probably one reasonable direction of analysis is to see how long it takes to close these complaints and see whether there are some systematic reasons for delays or whatever. I mean, if we were managing the 311 system, that's what we would like to know. Like, where does it take longer? Where does it take shorter? Like, what's going on? Are we closing stuff in a timely fashion? Those kind of things, right? So what we want to do is we want to essentially look at the time that it takes to close it, which is this time, the close time, minus the open time. That tells us how long the complaint was open and unresolved in our system. So that becomes easy now because we have our times here, our date time objects. All we need to do is to take close date minus created date, and we can create a new column. Remember, in pandas you can create new columns just by adding a name to it. So this is going to create a new column in data called processing time, and that's the difference between these two. So let's run that, and we can take a look at this and see its statistics over there. So describe, remember, describes for any numerical or calculatable column, because date times are not technically numerical. It can do some calculation. So this tells us that the mean time to close a complaint was 5 days, 5 hours, 11.53 minutes, right? 11.53. So 5 days, 0 hours, 5 minutes, and 11.53 seconds. The standard deviation is 12 days, etc. The minimum is negative 134 days. Well, that's a problem, right? We can't really be closing complaints before they occur. That doesn't make any sense. But we'll come back to that. The maximum is 148 days. That also sounds like a lot, but we will check that out. And this describe also gives us the quartiles. We saw that last week again, but just to remind you again, what it tells us is that the first quartile, the bottom quartile, that is the fastest closure time, was between negative 134 days and 2 hours 34 minutes. The second one was between 2 hours 34 minutes and 21 hours 10 minutes. So it looks pretty good, actually. 50% of them, assuming that this negative 134 makes sense, are closed within a day, right? So that's not so bad. Then the next one is 4 days, and then the last one is 148 days. 4 days to 148 days. So next one is 21 hours to 4 days, and the slowest closures are from 4 days to 148 days. So that's our very quick way of looking at this stuff here. What we want to do now is we want to look at the odd stuff. The odd stuff is, what the heck is negative processing time? And since our data is for 2 months, we want to see whether 148 days is actually sensible or not. 2 months is 60 or 61 or 62 days, right? Not more than that. So, and this September and October, so it's 61 days. So we want to see whether 148 days is something wrong with that. Is it bad data, or is it really the correct thing? So let's start by looking at the negative processing time, and we can take a look at that very straightforward again by looking at our from our data, extracting the rows that have a time delta less than 0, right? That's all the negative stuff. So let's take a look at that, and we get this here, and we find that this is very confusing because it tells us that the complaint here, for example, was on 20th of October, this one, and it closed on 19th of October. Most likely, when thinking of this, looking at this data, most likely what happened is that the closing date and opening date creation date and closing date got interchanged. That would be my guess. However, we don't know that, and this is something that as a data analyst you probably need to go back to the client or the person who gave you the data and see, is that what's going on? If that's what's going on, then you should interchange these two values for these for any negative thing here. If there's something else going on, then we have to take care of that. For now, because we don't have access to the client, to the 311 data people, we are going to say, all right, we will probably just dump them. Okay, but in reality, when you're cleaning data, you have to go back and try to figure out why something strange is going on in the database. So let's take a look at the other side. That is the stuff that is 148 days and over. So the maximum that we saw here was 148 days, 13 hours, this one here. 148 days, 13 hours and 10 minutes. So let's take a look at that what's more than 148 days, right? So we say time delta of 148 days, and we extract that data from our data set, and we find there are 2 such cases. And looking at this, we see that it's open on September 1st and closed on January 28th. So that is September, October, November, December. That's about 120, another 20, 148. That looks reasonable, right? It doesn't see anything wrong with that. Similarly, this opened on September 1st and closed on January 27th of the next year. So this also probably is a valid date. So we'll say, all right, we will take care of 148 days seems okay. So we are okay with this stuff, right? So anything that took longer than 60 days is probably all right in our database. So the upper end makes sense, in other words, and the negative times basically don't, right? Oops. The negative times don't, but the upper end makes sense. So though we need to explore this, like I've said, and I want to reiterate that really we shouldn't be throwing data out willy-nilly the way I'm doing over here. We need to understand the data better and go back to the person who gave us the data or the organization that gave us the data and understand why there is something inside it, because we never want to remove data that will be useful in our analysis, because we're going to get a biased analysis, and it's better to have no analysis than to have biased results. That's the bottom line. Okay, so you really need to work on this very carefully. So what we'll do is we will for now just throw the negatives and say that we only want to include data that has time greater than or equal to 0. I mean, actually it probably says 1 second, but or greater than 0, but whatever. So we do that, and we get a new database here, and can do data dot. Oh, I can't do that again. That's okay.